Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
And we have a guest with us today.
Hi, I'm John Bennett. I am a bureaucrat in DC.
John, welcome to the show. We met actually the first time I went to visit DC, just at the Less Wrong meetup up there.
Yeah, that's right, at the Portrait Gallery.
In December, you came out to the Bay Area for the Rationalist Solstice. You hung out for a few days and had a presentation you gave at Lighthaven. We're only going to touch on part of it now because it was too wide-ranging for one episode. The part that I wanted to talk about is the Milton Friedman theory of political change.
Yeah, political change or policy change or just like governmental change in general.
Maybe we should start off with, who is Milton Friedman?
Milton Friedman was an economist at the University of Chicago. He gets most of the credit for establishing the Chicago School of Economics. But this is actually kind of orthogonal to his main points. Some of the ideas he's known for are deregulating the airline industry in the 70s, changing Federal Reserve policy in the 70s and early 80s, helping to get inflation under control. He was actually crucial to ending the draft as well. Most of what he's known for is fairly right-coded these days, but he was a classic libertarian in that he also had personal freedom, left-coded ideas as well that he pushed with equal fervor.
So this guy knows a thing or two about political change if he was behind a couple major changes.
Yeah, in the 80s, as his ideas started to get traction, people asked him how that worked, since his ideas seemed so radical in the 60s when he was first writing. He had, frankly, the best summation of political change I've really ever heard. I think it's worth going through in detail and then discussing.
Excellent. The first thing I have here in my notes was that it's impossible to deliberately move the Overton window is part of his thing.
Mm-hmm. So here, let me just read the full quote. It's only a few lines, and I think really most every line of this is important. He says in the introduction to one of his books, "There is enormous inertia, a tyranny of the status quo, in private and especially governmental arrangements. Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable."
That's some poetic writing, especially in that last sentence.
Yeah, and it's really telling because his ideas when he was writing in the 60s, some of them were the government didn't always do this and it should stop doing this, but some of them, like ending the draft during the Cold War, were almost unthinkable. And there really wasn't a way to just gradually convince everyone of this idea. You needed some sort of hook. You needed some sort of change to make ideas that were outside the Overton window, but ultimately correct, be conceivable, be discussable in the open.
Real quick, I realize we've been using the word Overton window like everyone knows what it means. What is the Overton window?
So the Overton window, I'm forgetting the formal definition, which I think is actually important. But in just common parlance, it's the ideas that are discussable. But I think in the and y'all should check me on this, but I think the formal definition was ideas that people in politics will receive sanction for if they discuss openly. The idea being that Overton windows aren't just soft social pressure, they're actually enforced. So shifting the Overton window can be quite hard because there are actual consequences to stepping outside of it.
I think there's a couple of examples that help illustrate this. In my understanding, what's politically acceptable or mainstream by the general public at the given time. So public conversations about the end of the world due to AI was beyond the Overton window 5 years ago, and is less so now. But as far as like political sanctioned stuff, the idea of proposing interracial or same-sex marriage was beyond the public acceptability, and trying to do it was sanctionable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, proposing either complete elimination of any abortion rights or abortion right up until the day before birth are both outside the Overton window.
I would disagree with that, especially given where...
Yeah, since in some states it's literally the law, I think it is that is well within the window.
Yeah,
but it depends on which part of the public you're talking to.
Yeah, that gets actually very tricky, given that there really isn't a single Overton window anymore. There are several, but that is a much deeper conversation. I do need to say, just a basic disclaimer, I work for the government, but these ideas are my own, and none of this necessarily reflects any opinion that the government or any particular agency may have. I have not actually asked for clearance to discuss things, so I just don't intend to touch on work today. All of this is just stuff I picked up from going to school and then living in DC for 20 plus years.
Let's get back to the main topic. If the Overton window is impossible to change, then what the heck do we actually do?
Backing up a bit, like people have this feeling that the hardest part of getting political change is getting your ideas into the ears of policymakers, like finding them, getting in touch, getting your idea a hearing. In our system, that's actually just not that hard. That is surprisingly easy. I know people who have done it. I know people who are pushing ideas that are outside the Overton window quietly to avoid getting the people they're talking to in trouble, but you can actually talk about ideas with people who help set policy pretty easily. It's just not that hard. The hard part is getting discussions going more broadly and then getting your I agree with you turned into actual action. Those are both much harder steps than people think. The Milton Friedman quote slash idea helps explain why and how that works.
I've gotten the feeling that there's a lot of people in Congress who have heard about various proposals and are on board with changing them. Things like the Jones Act, things like AI policy. They say things like, yep, this seems like a good idea, but like, what do you expect me to do about it? There's a million things the government is doing right now. This is not a focus. I cannot spend my precious political capital on this thing at the moment.
Exactly.
So come back later kind of thing.
Or even not just come back later, but yes, I'm with you when this comes up. But that just leaves the question of what makes something come up. Friedman's answer that I really believe is the case 80 or 90% of the time is the answer is events. The answer is some sort of crisis, real or perceived.
There's a lot of good examples to jump from. It's easy to think of politically charged ones, but there's a current salient example that is not politically charged, which is the fire prevention policy in California. I think that's on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, especially people who are in the area. I was listening to an episode recently on Sam Harris's podcast with Rick Caruso. He's been arguing for years about all this brush up here is just kindling waiting to happen, and he's been arguing that for 30 years. Then when you know it, the right spark and the right wind, and everything's up in smoke. Now that everything's burned down, we'll probably get policy changes, but it's a drag that it takes this kind of catalyst to enact change. It would be ideal that if someone made a solid enough case that people could say, oh yes, that makes sense. Let's do that. Not let's do that later when this is a problem.
Well, there's the old line, every safety policy is written in blood. It's hard to generalize from theoretical examples. You really do need people need to see something to make something urgent to get focus much of the time.
Yeah, he pointed out a fire in the 60s that was just a great setup for the fire that's going on now. Or rather, we're recording early February. Hopefully, it's a thing of the past by the time this airs. So that's just one example. Are there any that you like or that you use to help illustrate this point?
Yeah, so this became really, really clear to me, more than in the past during COVID. It's hard to even remember how radical some of the ideas that got implemented within weeks or months in 2020, how radical those ideas really were. For several months, we had almost a functional universal basic income in this country. We had massive policy changes on the federal and the local levels based on laws that had last been touched in 1919. We had just these huge changes to personal liberty, to what the governments could do that were often necessary and certainly seemed necessary at the time, but were just impossible to the point of being openly mocked as late as late January and early February. There's a famous article in some online publication. I'm not sure I remember which and don't want to slander anyone, but the headline was something like, "No handshakes, please, we're in tech," that was just making fun of COVID precautions in late January and early February in San Francisco, when the later data showed it was already in community and spreading. And a month later, those policies were, the whole policy community had gone far past that to universal lockdowns.
The changes in policy due to COVID-19 were basically temporary in response to an active emergency,
Mhm.
right? It's not the same kind of thing as, like you mentioned, like ending the draft or the legalization of same-sex marriage, where that's something that is now the way that things are. People are allowed to shake hands again and go outside without masks. What was Milton or Friedman, rather? We're not close enough to be on first name terms yet. Um, was Friedman talking about the kinds of like emergency policies, during crises, or is he talking about things that then thereafter become the case, like the Patriot Act during 9/11, after 9/11, stuff like that?
I think you're right. I think he's more talking about long-term change, and that is the more interesting case. But to illustrate how the dynamic works, I think COVID is a great example to show how quickly ideas can go from unthinkable and openly mocked to implemented.
I think you make a good point. Pre and post 9/11 was also kind of like, here's a crisis, and now things are different really dramatically, and they've been dramatically different ever since.
I hate that this is the case, and I think a lot of rationalists feel the same way. It very much feels like if you can show why a change is good and should happen, or even why the status quo is awful, like when babies are dying due to not enough fish oil in the premature birth formula. I don't want to bring up this particular incident that I'm thinking of, but there was a country that had a big problem with the violence against women, and not until a major shocking incident did they actually start changing the laws and working more on enforcement. I hate that there needs to be a big incident to make change happen, and you can't just make a good argument, present it to people, and they say, "Oh yeah, that's a good point. What we're doing now is terrible. Let's change it." Things like the Jones Act, for example. What the hell? Why can't we do that? Why is the world awful like this?
That's a very good question, but I think it has a good answer that is a reasonable answer. And the answer broadly is priors. There are so many policies, there are so many things that a government, a nation does that people are responsible for, that some number of people disagree with. If you are in Congress or even in a regulatory agency that has a more narrow focus, if you were open to ideas that were not the topic of the day all the time, you'd never get anything done. You would spend all of your time taking meetings, hearing about and trying to formulate policies and getting some amount of traction on changing a policy that is very difficult to do because no one's coordinated on it. There isn't an obvious reason to get to 270 votes that you would need to pass a thing.
The example is that we don't want to wait until everyone's killed by AI to start enacting AI policy. It would be nice if we could put something together before then, but I'm reminded of, shortly after the launch of ChatGPT, Yudkowsky had that Time article published, and
Mhm.
he wasn't outright advocating for blowing up data centers, but he pitched the idea as this might become necessary and
Yeah.
isn't necessarily insane. That's, I think, the kind of thing you're talking about, is that, before something happens, ideas like that seem really radical,
Mhm.
and you'll burn a lot of time just arguing about the merits of it, rather than, I don't know, addressing present concerns. Is that kind of what you're
Exactly.
saying?
It is, yeah. I think the Time article is a good example. It still touches a nerve for some people because it was clear that he was not saying, let's nuke the data centers. But that is kind of how that article got received. And I think it's honestly just people talking past each other. I'll put it this way. If the outside the Overton window idea that a person was trying to gain traction for was let's nuke the data centers, The Yudkowsky article is how that idea would have been floated. So people in DC, I think, sort of read that as saying, I'm here to bring up ideas that I'm not going to fully explain just yet, but I want to shift the Overton window in response to this perceived crisis. And the endpoint that I'm hinting at, they thought, was let's nuke the data centers. And you can see how that happens. And you can see how that's just a misunderstanding, but it was a misunderstanding, and I think it's best avoided, which is one of the reasons why I'm up to talking about this.
Yeah, the more modest proposal in there was like, let's track the bulk sale of AI chips the kind of same way we track the sale of plutonium. These are dangerous things if used incorrectly, and it makes sense to know where they all are. And if someone starts collecting a bunch of them, we should know where they are and be able to ask them, hey, what are you doing? I guess even phrased that way, if someone's prior on this being a problem is so low, even that sounds like kind of a huge infringement of rights. It's like, what do you mean? I bought this. Get off my back, right?
Right.
So
And I think that really was politically achievable in the month where the Time article came out. I think if that had been the ask, that probably could have gotten done. And the thing is, he did ask for that, but there were other asks as well, and it all kind of got muddled.
I think there were attempts to try and make that happen.
Mhm.
The
There
bill
still
in
are.
California, for example, which got vetoed, and then Biden's rather impotent but well-intentioned executive order was overturned, of course, immediately upon the new term change. But
I want to swing back to the theory of change here. Part of the problem here is that everybody has a model of the system that they think that they're working with. Like, everybody has a model that they're working with, that how the world works, right? The model doesn't need major changes right now. Maybe some adjustments here and there, which is why it's really hard to implement major change. But every now and then, something happens that is a major surprise to the system.
Mhm.
And usually that thing is some sort of major crisis. The thing that happens when there is such a surprise is that they say, oh shit, what the hell just happened? Did somebody else predict that this kind of thing is going to happen?
Yes.
And that is where the opportunity comes up.
Yeah, I think that's part of what Friedman was getting at with his actual or perceived bit. It's not actually crucial for the crisis to be real, only for the crisis to be perceived and surprising. When policymakers realize that the model they've been working with is wrong, and they look around and they see someone predicted this thing, and so their model is right, oftentimes you just get to pass a binder of policy changes. That's how a lot of the policy change worked in the 2008 financial crisis. Much of the changes implemented after that were not directly related to the housing bubble. Things like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau weren't really direct results of that. They didn't really have anything to do with the crisis, but they were related enough that people could capitalize on the crisis and say, and claim some credit for predicting it to get those ideas passed. There's a similar example that Ross Regan's U has talked about and certainly had a blog post about. I haven't been able to pull it up lately, but I'll see if we can dig that up and get it in the show notes. But he has a good history of the thalidomide crisis in, I think, the 60s in the FDA, where the FDA had drug its feet on approving some drugs that had thalidomide in them. The European countries had gone ahead with that. Thalidomide turned out to cause significant birth defects, and this actually wasn't a problem in the US because we hadn't approved those drugs, but it became such a perceived crisis that there were large changes to the FDA implemented in the wake of this perceived but not real crisis. Those changes didn't have a lot to do with thalidomide, but they were the ideas that people who had been arguing against thalidomide happened to want.
And that was because the people who had these changes ready had predicted something like this. And so when the government was surprised and went looking, they were like, oh, look, these are the people with a better model of the world that saw this coming.
Yeah. And so it's, hey, you clearly have a better idea of how this works than we did. And this is a republic. So what have you got for us? What should we do to prevent this from happening next time? You can get really good results out of this Friedman model of change by just assuming everyone's going into this with good intentions.
This is, I think, personal speculation by a mutual friend of ours. This friend thinks that in fall of 2022, when the major ChatGPT release was made, and everybody saw like, oh, holy shit, this thing is powerful and this thing is going to probably change the world. This took a lot of people in the government by surprise, and they looked around and said, has somebody been talking about this, writing about this, warning about this for some time? Is this already in somebody's model of the world? And it turned out that, like, yes, this organization named MIRI, headed by Eliezer Yudkowsky, has been speaking for quite a long time about how this exact thing is going to happen, and we need to be ready for it. This friend of ours speculated that the government may have reached out to MIRI to be like, your model looks to be far more correct than ours was. You're not surprised by this. We were. Do you have a binder for us? And that was a major missed opportunity on the part of the rationalists, because MIRI did not have a binder to present to the government.
I think that it is clear that MIRI did not have a binder at the time, and that not just MIRI. Let's say the community as a whole did not have a binder at the time. Even though, if you had asked, people had ideas that they thought would be helpful. It wasn't packaged, it wasn't ready to go, it wasn't in sort of the formats that DC understands. Or at the very least, it was in the let's have an interesting conversation form that DC understands, but not a let's pass something in Congress next month format. I know several people now are working on, and frankly have fixed that problem. There are now several binders floating around town that Congress could pick up and pass laws in a month if there's another political opening for that.
At least that's reassuring that we might catch the next window.
But we missed the one that was briefly open near the end of 2022.
I think that's mostly right. Yeah.
I don't know if we mentioned this explicitly, but this was part of Friedman's thesis here, was that like the strategy implementation step requires that there already be a prepared strategy in advance. Like, people aren't going to look for novel ideas to a problem while the problem is happening. They need to have somebody have had thought of this ahead of time and prepared an action plan. In the event of X, here's some ideas.
That's literally his next line in the paragraph here. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So we did touch on that.
Yeah.
You saw this was coming. You should have some kind of idea of what to do about it. So what is this binder exactly? Because that is such a vague and nebulous term for me. I have no idea what you mean by here's our binder.
It's mainly shorthand. It's a little bit making fun of Mitt Romney from that presidential campaign.
Oh my God.
Binders full of women.
Yeah, which he really did mean in good faith, and it was.
I've come now to appreciate that about him, that I'm sure he did, actually.
Yeah,
it was a soundbite that went around, didn't do many favors at the time.
It was a very DC mistake. There's a line, I think it's Michael Kinsley. The Kinsey gaffe is accidentally saying the truth. Where, again, every word of that is important, because like sometimes you can say the truth deliberately, and that's not a gaffe, because you can say the truth about many things most of the time. But the whole part where you accidentally let something slip that is telling in a way that you didn't intend, that is the classic Washington gaffe.
Well, in this case too, the people within who speak DC understood that he meant that, yeah, of course, I've got dossiers of plans and file cabinets full of names and people and resumes and all that. But what we hear is that, we picture something, I'm assuming, like a penthouse magazine,
Well, so I actually don't have an image of what is a binder. What does this mean, past the binder?
Okay, so this is a very good question. It is not a penthouse magazine, and I'm surprised at that example. The idea is that you have a sort of coordinated set of interlocking policy changes that have specific asks from specific people, and then arguments that those people can use, and arguments tailored to specific audiences and stakeholders that help explain why each part of this plan is necessary. So, to go into a bit more detail, what you ideally want to have, and frankly, what I think the community does now have, is some model legislation that Congress can have their 23-year-old staffers change into actual legislative language pretty straightforwardly, where exactly what you want Congress to do is laid out in detail over up to like 20 pages. If your policy involves regulatory change, you want to identify which agencies need to act and what those actions need to be. Then you need some general white papers that are structured sort of like a long Time magazine article or a short journal article that's addressing a general audience for, hey, here's this crisis. We have credibility because we predicted it. These are the things that we want to do to fix it the next time. Here's how this links back to what the crisis was, and here are the next steps to take. Ideally, but not crucially, ideally, you want versions of that article slash white paper that are targeted to specific constituencies. So if there's a national defense angle, you want a white paper that talks about the defense implications. If there's a separate foreign policy angle, you want that. If there's a separate commerce business angle, you want one on that. In each of these things, you should be making the case for, here's the main policy change we want from Congress, and also here are the things that we're asking from regulatory agencies. And here's how they all link together and link back to the crisis.
I was going to use just the kind of general pop cultural examples. Amy Santiago's love of binders in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, or Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec, where just having an indexed, if this happens, go to page 57 and read this. Oh, okay, perfect. Do this. It's an action plan. But I think what you just laid out, John, has a lot more of the reality of, here's the part where you talk to the money people in Congress. Here's the part where you talk to the defense people.
The binder is shorthand, but like in a lot of cases, you can literally print these out and it would fill a 2-inch binder. And that's about the amount of pages that these things should be. There'll be different tabs that are doing different things. And what I laid out are some of what those tabs would be. Like it's, in one sense, it's a shorthand joke, but in the other sense, these are often actually very real products.
Since you just said that you can literally print these out if you want to and put them in a 2-inch binder, you said that the situational awareness paper, you literally saw it printed out and floating around the cafeteria in the Pentagon. And this was actually pretty influential. I guess it's important to be able to print this out so people can just exchange it in physical format while they're in locations together off the clock talking about stuff like at a cafeteria, right?
Yeah, so that is helpful. The Aschenbrenner situational awareness paper, that it was weird and interesting in some cases because there are parts of it that he just can't believe, but it was very influential. It was read and presented and discussed in a way that DC understands a lot better than it understands blog posts, for example. Even though blog posts can be useful and can get policy change, but that's just not how most of Congress thinks about the world, usually.
Yeah.
Though I have seen occasionally, I'm struggling to remember some examples of this, but in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, some of the Mason School economists who were pushing Federal Reserve policy, oh goodness, I'm blanking on his name, the economist who was at Manifest, who was pushing nominal GDP targeting. At the time, there were a lot of blog posts talking about these ideas, and some people literally just made PDF versions of them that were in a more friendly, printable format. And I think that genuinely helped at the time and helped get the Federal Reserve to partially adopt in GDP targeting.
Oh, wow.
I think there's something to be said about the ability to actually hand somebody something physically rather than just text them a link. Because you can open the binder to the right page and say, look, right here is what we're talking about, rather than say, hey, click that PDF when you get a chance, because
Yeah.
no one ever clicks
Though
those, right?
that example is actually 15 years old, and it's worth keeping that in mind, that people are a little more natively online now. But honestly, it does help to print things out. People do walk around with papers. I like writing notes in the margins. Other people do too. That's a thing that people like. And frankly, with the state of government IT systems, it can be it's not all that easy to just pull out your personal tablet on the metro and open a PDF and use a stylus to write notes in the margin, and that you can't pull that up on your work computer. If you want to take stuff home, if you want to think about something on your downtime, printing it out that is still helpful.
I guess that brings me to the first point, which slightly surprised me because, I don't know, I'm a nerd and I always had felt in my earlier life that function should come first and form doesn't particularly matter. But it seems that form, like aesthetics, are actually pretty darn important. The binders do have a certain format they should be in, and that includes things like using language that is common in DC and surprisingly, having a logo on the cover and maybe like on every paper that like this is the organization that made these predictions, that whatever they're writing online was Miri or Less Wrong or whatever the group is, they have consistent branding that's on all their stuff, and that is all over the binder as well, because that, I don't know, that helps, that makes it look more official.
Yeah.
What are the aesthetics and why are they so important?
Yeah, so like on the one sense, this is ridiculous, but in another sense, you can see how a system would get there without being insane. There are lots of people with lots of ideas. It's almost a proof of work system that you are showing that you understand the constraints that policymakers are under by following the tropes that they follow. Yeah, on the one hand, that's unfair. On the other hand, that's understandable. It is surprisingly easy to talk to your congressman. It is surprisingly easy to get a meeting with congressional committee staffers. It is surprisingly easy to bring up your idea, but then this happens a lot, and they talk to a lot of people with ideas that just aren't going to go anywhere, and that's obvious in the first minute or two of this meeting. I've been in meetings like that where you've taken this meeting for some soft social pressure, or you're sitting in for your boss because your boss guessed that this wasn't as important as the people asking for thought. And in the first couple of minutes, you know that this is a waste of time, it's not going anywhere, and you sort of tune out. Like that is a real thing. So by showing that you know how this works, by showing that you're in the club, you're not wasting their time, you've done the work to polish this and make it something that's palatable and doable and practical, you get more of a hearing and you get more attention. Is that good? Is that bad? It's not wrong. It's the way people work.
Right. It's one of those things that, like, sure, it may be onerous, but like, if the clown lobbyists out there can do it, there's no reason a rationalist shouldn't be able to do it as well.
Correct.
That might sell a little better without the word clown.
And frankly, nowadays, I think we may have better aesthetics. We can make some pretty good white papers and PDFs.
You point to the situational awareness paper as just a really good example of, if someone wants to know what this sort of thing should look like, go look at that. They did a really good job of it.
Yeah. Another in this vein that a person you've met, at least briefly, the Narrow Path report. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but my perception of what they're trying to do is to bridge the gap between situational awareness, which was really just trying to get attention and get a model in people's heads, and then some of the more close to the Overton window stuff from the Center for AI Policy that has like model legislation posted that you can go read. The Narrow Path, I think, is trying to fill the gap between those two, where they're pitching something that's further outside the Overton window, involving quite a bit of international cooperation, norms setting, things like that. But they are doing it in a way that might actually be plausible in a future crisis. They're describing the analogy back to prior policy to show that this sort of thing is not unprecedented. And have a good pitch and a good format for how to get from A to B.
Who is the target audience for these papers? Because it sounded like you were saying that, at the very least, the initial people that are reading it are going to be congressional staffers who are young folk in their mid-20s.
Who's the audience is always a crucial question. That'll matter and that'll change based on which tab of the binder you're on. The model legislation that is for congressional staffers, particularly nerdy congressmen, of which there are many, like a solid chunk of Congress are actually legislative nerds who care about this a lot. Interest groups, including the interest groups that you're trying to regulate. So in the case of AI policy, OpenAI and the other labs are going to be reading this and are going to have thoughts, and you need to be talking to them in what you're publishing. But the white papers can be for broader audiences. They can have wider targets. When the binder is first finished, the audience is the future. Like, very few people are going to read this at first. The idea is that you want this thing to exist. You want these ideas to be kept alive, but you're not going to get a ton of attention, and it's not going to be important until a crisis makes it. So what you want are some evergreen article type things that address a future audience that might be newly open to this idea, but you don't know exactly who that audience is going to be. You do for things like model legislation, because that has a pretty narrow audience of maybe a couple thousand people. But the broader white papers and the arguments that you're going to make and the talking points that people are going to crib from when they go to talk about ideas on panel shows or the radio or podcasts or just at bars in DC. Those talking points can't be so narrowly tailored because you don't know who your audience is going to be.
So you mentioned people talking with each other at bars or restaurants or whatever. How important is distribution? Because it sounded like the phenomenon of people talking with each other a lot is pretty crucial to this. How does one get this distributed widely? Is that anything one can control?
So this is sort of outside my expertise. I've seen some good examples of PR. I think that the timing in retrospect ended up being tragic, but the press around the book launch for What We Owe the Future was was noticeably good and professional, and it got a bunch of good coverage in outlets that I wouldn't have expected. It got talked about a lot, and I have no idea how they did that.
Okay.
But it was noticeable at the time that, hey, this is going really well, to a degree that I don't think was a coincidence. I think someone had orchestrated that pretty deliberately. No clue how they did it, but whoever was the publicist for that did a great job.
You're talking Will MacAskill's book from a year or two ago?
Yes, when that came out, I think it was before the FTX collapse, because it's hard to imagine getting good coverage for that after. The press coverage for that at the time was fantastic, and there were several profiles of MacAskill. I think the New Yorker covered him in a noticeably good article. Some other articles came out about other people in the community that were reasonably pro and at the very least fair. It was handled really well.
So far, we've been talking kind of in abstract entities, powers and principalities. I kind of want to know who the actual people doing this are. Like, if something surprising happens and someone says, oh shit, my model didn't cover this, but their model does, let's go ask for their binder. Who is the person that said that, and who is the person that asks for the binder and reads the binder?
Okay, that's a very good question. And the answer is it varies a lot. But what tends to happen, at least in like classical Washington, is that a few committees or subcommittees will start squabbling over who gets to get the press over this.
Who gets to get the press over a crisis that just happened?
Or over how to address the crisis that just happened. A good example of this would be from the financial crisis, the Dodd-Frank Act. And why was it called the Dodd-Frank Act? Because those were two very influential congressmen who were able to lead the discussion on what to do about the financial crisis. I think they were both full committee chairs. They may have been subcommittee chairs. Regardless, they were able to ask around, find out who had good ideas on how to address this. In both cases, Frank and Dodd were able to pull up some ideas that they had on the shelf personally, that they had been wanting to do, that they had even introduced before but hadn't gotten any traction. And they combined their little pet ideas with some broader topics from people who had been pushing for stronger regulation of consumer finance, and packaged up and got a solid interlocking set of changes passed, both through Congress and then reaffirmed through regulatory agencies.
If Congress people didn't already have something in mind that they personally wanted, like are really taken by surprise, how do they find a group, a binder, and who reads that binder first? Because I imagine they reach out to a whole bunch of places.
I would think so. So part of this is that it's important to claim credit when something that you predicted actually comes to pass. Because Congress, especially people who are interested in this in Congress, will go out and look. They'll have their staff go out and look for, who has good ideas on this? But they're not always going to find you. You should try to get in the press with, hey, I called this thing. Here's why you should listen to me more. I have some ideas on what to do next. They won't necessarily find your better mousetrap. You do have to promote it somewhat.
The fact that you have to have some visibility already, to me, feels like a strong case for keeping sites like Less Wrong alive, or groups like Miri, because like a lot of people can post independently on their blogs, but having a long-standing organization like that does make it rise to public consciousness easier, and gives it some credibility, right?
Exactly. And like that brings us back to the last sentence of the Friedman quote. That, I believe, is our basic function: to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes politically inevitable. I really do think that he thought this through and gave a solid distillation for how this works. Keeping enough attention and credibility to be able to say, I told you so later, is crucial to how policy change actually works in the real.
I think a good example of that might be like as unfortunately ill-received as Yudkowsky's Time article would have, or as his article was, it would have been so much worse if no one had ever heard of him before and he'd never published anything online. He'd just sound like a crackpot.
Well, then he wouldn't have a Time article.
Well, all right, if he had published his first blog post and this was it, right?
I think both are true.
Yeah, I think that the idea that, he's got 20 years of credibility and an organization that's been around since, 2001 under his belt, allowed him to get the Time article and got people to read it with some actual seriousness.
So a committee goes looking for a binder and they have it delivered and they read through it at that point?
Yeah. In the wake of a crisis, real or perceived, there is a conversation. That conversation happens in the press, in bars, in offices. There's this idea that people have of the smoky, shadowy Washington back room. I mean, I really haven't been in that back room all that much, but the conversations that happen there really just mirror what were on the Sunday shows the weekend prior. There's no secret reserve of adults in the room who have the responsible conversations outside the public view. No, it's basically people responding to and reacting to and copying and saying they agree or disagree with just what was in the press over the past week.
And I think you said that most of the people in these committees are kind of policy nerds, like they care a lot about a topic they specialize in and aren't quite as partisan as people imagine.
They often are. The appropriate level of cynicism is a fascinating question. I think most people who will be hearing this podcast need to be told to be less cynical about DC. So many congressmen are straight up nerds. That's not everyone. There are congressmen who really have no interest in legislating and very little understanding of how any of that works. And their main intent is to get on cable news and then get an evening show when they leave Congress in 3 years. Like that is a real type that's in Congress, and it's appropriate to be cynical about them. But I don't even think that that's the majority. I think that actually most congressmen want to be there and want to make policy change and want to do good work while they're here. That doesn't always happen. Congress gets deadlocked often, but there are years where Congress wakes up and actually does stuff. There was 2017, 2018. I think 2018 in particular was a year where Congress actually legislated and passed some stuff that were real policy changes. The CHIPS Act was interesting in that that was a real bipartisan policy change from Congress that really started to make some changes that were not just that didn't just come from leadership, that actually came through committees and followed the old school how a bill becomes a law process.
What was the CHIPS Act?
I don't want to go too far over my skis here, but broadly speaking, the CHIPS Act was trying to restrict certain high-tech chips from being sold to China or other sanctioned entities, and also industrial policy to bring some of the Taiwanese expertise in advanced chip manufacturing to the US. And it's notable that none of this is ever perfect, but both sides of that have gone relatively well. And there's now a new TSMC chip fab in, I think, Phoenix that got surprisingly good results and is able to produce high-end chips at really good quality and throughput numbers, much better than I expected.
Awesome. Yeah, now that you describe it, it rings a bell. Somebody does have acronyms or whatever, and I thought that's what this was, but no, it's literally CHIPS. Okay, yes.
And it's also an acronym.
Yeah, it is. There's this very annoying, very nerdy, very stupid DC way of coming up with an acronym for the idea that you want and then making words that get back to that acronym.
It's a backronym.
It's so annoying. But this is just, it's a running joke in DC. And at this point, I think that people are competing to make terrible acronyms just for the sheer prestige of it.
Oh my God.
At least now they can use ChatGPT and Claude to help give them creative ideas for like just terribly shoehorned acronyms. I'm into it.
Oh God, why would you put that idea into the world, Stephen?
It's someone has to have thought of that.
So you say someone has to have thought about that. That is not true.
All right. Well, I had an original idea that maybe I shouldn't have put out there.
This is an important point that I want to dive in on a bit. The policy community is not huge. A lot of people outside this world, a lot of people in academia or industry think that, oh, this is such an obvious idea. Someone must have thought about it, and it's hanging around in the ether somewhere. It's so obvious. That is not remotely true. You would be surprised at the things that surprise this town. It's useful to explain your steps. It's useful to have blog posts that explain even the basic concepts of what you're trying to do. You can link those in footnotes from your tighter white paper. That's perfectly okay, but don't assume that what you think is obvious to other people.
Well, and that's a good general principle. And if you think it's actually a bad idea to percolate, it would be funny just to bleep it. And
no, it just annoys me personally. It's not going to end the world.
All right,
it's
John.
just going to make things harder to read, and you're going to have to buy a mouth guard for all the cringing you'll be doing. Sorry about that.
You have a suggestion for young, enthusiastic rationalists who want to make changes in the world, especially on a policy level. That is, get together and think about what crises do we predict coming in the future, ones that are not already generally seen as coming by the public. Figure out what crises we think are going to happen and start predicting how they're going to happen, what's going to happen, and maybe start having a binder ready for them.
Yeah. So there's two aspects of that. One, there's just what do our ideas predict that would surprise people once they come true? The other side of that coin is that the crisis doesn't need to actually be real. the crisis can be perceived. The crisis can be something like thalidomide, where it was not actually a problem in the US, but it suddenly came to the public consciousness because some press coverage from European countries in the 60s got picked up by American media. That sort of thing can be, I don't want to say manufactured, but that sort of thing can be coordinated. And it is possible to, with care and PR skills that I do not have, but some people who exist have these skills, who are able to coordinate a product launch or a book launch or some sort of thing that can surprise people if there is some care put into how to get that conversation started. You don't always have to predict the future, though that certainly helps. If you can get this perceived surprise to kick in some other way, that works too.
And it does have to be some sort of surprise, because right now everybody and their grandma is looking at AI is going to unemploy everybody. So that's just priced in. It has to be something actually novel.
Slight disagreement to that, actually.
Really?
So, so there's the idea that everyone understands intellectually that AI is going to increasingly automate certain things. People don't really see that coming for themselves in the same way. I could easily see a surprise driven by the speed to which this is happening, or some big company automating something that the policy community didn't expect would be possible for several more years, or even an unemployment crisis in a particular sector. If, for example, there are suddenly a lot of unemployed programmers or accountants or something specific like that, I think that would really qualify as a crisis and a surprise, and something that DC would try to do something about.
Huh, interesting.
Even a long-term trend that you think is obvious may not be obvious in terms of the speed or the impact or the particular news thing that causes the discussion to spike this week or this month.
As Friedman had said, that a real actual or a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. And you mentioned perceived. This was something that when I was reading about this morning, that I flagged as a good opportunity for a malicious actor to create a perceived crisis and then put forward changes to solve this non-existent problem. Is this something that you've thought about? I'm trying to think of a more useful way of framing that, but maybe I'll just hand it to you.
Short answer is yes. This model, I think, not everyone's citing Friedman for it. There's a bunch of other formulations. There's Rama manuals, never let a crisis go to waste. There's various ways to describe this same model. And I think that this model is pretty widely shared in DC, to the point where people trying to push policy change will, in a professional way, will almost always say, you should care about this policy because there is this crisis. Maybe you haven't heard about this crisis, but it's a crisis involving, let's make up an example. There's a crisis involving the price of eggs. We're going to formulate this big policy push because eggs are dramatically expensive nowadays. We're going to expand housing construction in cities so that we take the pressure off of rural land to improve the prices of eggs. Well, is that really connected to the crisis? No. Are egg prices really a huge national crisis? Well, when we're speaking in February, they're mildly annoying, but it's not really a huge national crisis. But you will see organizations saying, my housing policy, my industrial policy, my foreign policy connects back to this topic of the day. And a lot of it's silly. So there's a base level of silliness that your perceived crisis needs to clear.
Let me float this, because I just saw this happening on Trace's timeline on Twitter. The FAA has been having a slow rolling hiring crisis for over a decade now, which some people have tried to bring to light, and it's sort of been working lately in the past year to get some more attention on it. But recently there was that major crash where a Black Hawk helicopter hit a airliner and everyone died. There were a few people who I saw saying, look, a lot of people are dead. This is not the time for it. Be respectful to the dead, give it some time. To
Mm.
me, that felt, based on having learned about the Milton Friedman theory of change in crisis, that almost felt like a deliberate attempt to sabotage any change. To be like, you know what, let's just ignore this and do nothing for a little while until the crisis passes, is just a recipe for saying, let's not do anything ever. Because, yeah, you give it some time, you be respectful, and then the crisis is over, and now things will not change because the brief period when change was possible has passed. Am I correct in thinking of it that way? That this is almost enemy action?
So you are absolutely right that we should wait for a respectful amount of time before talking about solutions. In practice, works as a we should turn down the temperature on this policy and let it pass. I
Mm-hmm.
genuinely don't know and wouldn't want to speculate on how often that is done deliberately. Like, how often is that just something people say because they are sad and shocked and don't want to go into policy mode? And how often is that enemy action? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I think that you're right that it's a mix of both. To flip the partisan valence of this, the you'll often hear requests for waiting a respectful amount of time after mass shootings. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about gun control policy, there's
Yeah.
this comes up a lot, and I think some people mean it, and I think some people don't, and I wouldn't want to guess who is who, but you're right. When your topic is in the news, it's important to get to work. If you think that you have an idea that can help prevent this from happening next time, it's important to push through that and do your job.
I only have this like as one line in my notes, so I don't remember the details. But the other thing you were encouraging people to do if they are interested in policy and are aspiring young rationalists is to get in touch with the Horizon Fellowship. Could you briefly say what that is?
Uh, no. I know of several people who have gotten Horizon Fellowships. Those fellowships have gotten them placements in various places in the government temporarily. I know that in practice, it's getting people who share our ideas into, uh, well, I know of examples in both like congressional committees and regulatory agencies, but I forget who runs that and forget how that process works. But I know that they have put good people into good seats. So, yeah.
All right, we are running low on time. I want to throw this back to you then. What would you like to say that I
Hmm.
have not touched on?
In the classic should you reverse all advice that you hear sense, the thing that people outside DC, I think, need to hear more of is that it is sometimes a cynical place, but it's probably less cynical than you think. People care about getting good policy and good results more than you think. It is easier to get in touch, it is easier to get your ideas heard than you think that it is, probably. The things that are hard, the things that are limited, the things that are constraints, are political capital and a broad national discussion about the thing. Most of the time, the way that policy change works is by building some support in the background, keeping ideas alive, then capitalizing on a crisis, ideally one that you predicted, then calling in those people who had said, yeah, that seems like a good idea, and I'd be happy to support this. Say, hey, 2 years ago you said you'd be happy to support this. When it comes up, it's now relevant. Let's get to work.
That's awesome. That reminds me, the line Rahm Emanuel, never let a crisis go to waste. That almost sounds sinister, but there's a reading where it's really not. It's like, look, something terrible happens. Let's use this as an opportunity to make things better.
Exactly. And Rahm Emanuel is great in that on never met him, but the broad perception of him is that he really cares about the details and is super cynical about how to get those details enacted. So maximally good intentions and maximally sinister means there's some good amoral life advice to be had from that. Amoral in the sense of not immoral or moral, but just unconnected from morality. Here is the maximally effective way of accomplishing this goal. Ideally, you should be able to get your policy passed without mailing rotten fish to people. But if that's what it takes, it's not too bad.
What is that a metaphor for? Mailing rotten fish?
Oh, it's not a metaphor at all. He literally mailed rotten fish.
Wait, why would you mail rotten fish to people?
I forget the details, but it is something that he did in the Clinton administration to make a point that
It's an attention grabber.
It became just an in-joke in certain circles.
I'm going to have to look up this rotting fish thing.
I will too, because I don't remember how it happened, but it's one of the stories that is told about him.
Rationalists looking to work in policy. I have heard that Tracing Woodgrains is starting some sort of educational policy think tank. I am familiar with Balsa Research, which seems to be just creating binders for low-hanging fruit that can be addressed if the crisis comes up, and they're taking volunteers. Do you have any opinions on either of these projects, or are there others that you know of?
Yeah, so I have met both of those people. They're both doing some good work and certainly endorse reaching out. Balsa is currently focused on Jones Act stuff, but they have some other policy ideas that they'd like to get into once they get a little more capacity. On AI policy, there are several good organizations. One in DC that I know of and is focused on Congress in particular is the Center for AI Policy.
We had an interview with them last year.
A year and a half ago, maybe. They've done some great work. They've done briefings in Congress. You can rent some of the conference rooms in the congressional office buildings and just give presentations. They've done that and gotten some good press coverage from that. They've written model legislation. They've done quite a bit to bring this to the attention of the relevant committees in Congress. I think really anyone interested in AI policy who has any sort of federal government ask should get in touch with them. I think they've done much more good work on this than is widely known.
That's great to hear. If people want to follow up or learn more about what you have to say on this, where can they look?
Once this comes out, I will hang around in y'all's Discord a bit more. Maybe not during work hours, since we'll all be in person from here on. But your Discord's a good place. People can email me. I guess reach out to you guys for that. You know what? I will commit to giving you guys a LinkedIn link because I keep getting peer pressure to use that more. And putting it publicly in a podcast is a great way to force myself to do.
Nice. And also, I hear you're going to be having a Less Wrong post for us.
Oh, yes. I will also have a Less Wrong post talking about this, giving a few deeper examples, a few notable counter examples, which some friends have helped out to find, and just having a more accessible version of this for people to read, which I will give the link to put in the show notes.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you for coming on. This has been a delight.
Yeah, seconded. I wish I could just say the same thing without sounding redundant, but what he said.
Nice.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Stephen, welcome back.
Hey, how's it going, man?
We have some end of show things to do. Can I touch on a couple quick promotions first?
Of course.
All right. The first being that we are just less than 2 weeks out from the HPMOR 10-year anniversary wrap parties everywhere. If you are in Denver, we are having them, I believe, the same place we had our original wrap party 10 years ago at Darcy's Pub. Is that correct?
It is not officially on the books yet.
We don't have a location picked out just yet.
Exactly. There's a couple of tiny loose-hanging threads that will be resolved in the next couple of days.
Okay, well, there's definitely going to be one, so if you're in Denver or anywhere in the near area, also, we know the Colorado Springs people often come up. There's also, if you're in the Bay Area around Berkeley, Lighthaven is going to be hosting one as well. I will be there for that one. Lots of cities are having events and meetups. Check the link in the show notes to RSVP and to check where the nearest one to you is.
Awesome.
Second promotion is kind of a shameless personal plug. Probably the last time I'm going to mention this, but I do have a new short story collection out that came out last month called Dear Grom and Other Stories by Eneasz Brodsky. So feel free to pick that up, and if you ever see me out in the real world, I will sign it. Unless, of course, you're Steven. Because I was at your house, and by the time we were done with everything, we were tired, and I forgot to sign it, so I apologize for that.
I didn't bring it into the room with a pen or anything, so...
It also took me a number of months to sign the novel, What Lies Dreaming, right?
I want to say years.
Jesus Christ, I'm so sorry.
I mean, it's not like...
What the hell is wrong with me?
Well, it's not like I was asking every time. You're around. I'll get a signature.
That's true.
Yeah. But anyway,
wait,
if you
did sign it eventually, right?
Oh, yeah, you've signed it.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you have, less frequent contact to Eneasz and you do bump into him, he'll sign it too, so...
Absolutely.
And he won't put it off for weeks.
No, I'll do it right there on the spot.
So yeah, do check it out. I love, this isn't me. I would be honest with you if I didn't like your writing. I like your writing, and
thank you.
I think if anyone hasn't read anything of yours, you can find some of your short stories on deathisbad.substack.com.
Yes, that is where I blog.
Yeah, you've got I think a subheading for short stories there. I haven't read the Dear Grom and Other Short Stories yet, but What Lies Dreaming is an actual novel story book.
It's a novel.
You authors have your words for different words for however long it is.
If it's really long, it's a novel.
And well, what if it's stupid long, 900 pages?
I mean, it's usually still novel. You can start saying wow, that is a tome, man. But
okay.
Just the official word is novel. If there's a number of novels together, that's a series.
Gotcha. You reasonably is a well-paced book and doesn't need to be 900 pages long. It is a concise duration / page length.
420-ish.
I wish it was exactly that.
Oh, because of the marijuana.
Yeah, because the internet thing. Go buy it. Buy it now. Consume.
Yes,
spend money.
We have one thing that we actually get paid to promote. The reason we accepted these people as people that we do advertising for is because we really believe in their mission.
We're official sponsors, and I officially endorse them. So yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I would not take advertising revenue from someone if I didn't believe in their product or their mission. And we really do believe in this one. And we're talking about the Guild of the Rose.
That said, I'm willing to sell out for whatever your stupid thing is for enough money. So Eneasz might have too much integrity, but I might sell out for a certain... you have a dollar amount, Eneasz. We would pitch for whatever for $1 million. So
and I don't know. I mean, maybe, but you see the grifters in far right-wing conspiratorial stuff where they're just selling shit coins and
Vitamins.
Blocks of bullion, to their listeners, and it's they're just taking advantage of paranoid people that don't have a firm grasp of reality, and that feels really shitty.
It does.
It's they know they're shilling a shit product that is just there to soak money from people who trust them.
But if you wrote me a check with 9 zeros on it, I could do a lot of good to offset that evil. So I just don't want to close the door to making a free $1 billion, all for the low price of my integrity, or rather for the high price of my integrity. All right. All that said, none of that comes into play here with the Guild of the Rose because I would shill them for free. So
hell yeah,
don't tell them that.
Right. I mean, we did a few times, right?
Of course, yeah.
And they were like, "Can you do this every episode if we give you money?" And we were like, Yeah, we can.
For whatever it's worth, I don't know if we've actually disclosed that they give us money, just that we partner with them.
That's what partnering with them means, right?
I think so. Or that we're aligned on our goals.
Understand that they give us some money for this?
I'm not sure. I'll let you ponder that.
There's no way they hear a 1-minute spot every single episode and don't think that we're getting something.
Other than the sweet gratification of telling people about an awesome thing.
All right, quick poll of our listeners. If you did not realize that we were getting some sort of money for mentioning the Guild of the Rose every week, please let us know.
I'd be curious.
But we do this primarily because we actually really believe in their mission.
Yeah, that's the whole long digression on me being a shill for the right amount is that I don't have to shill for this because I actually believe in it. The Guild of the Rose, for those who are uninitiated, should become initiated by going to theguildoftherose.com. But if you need a sales pitch, here it is.
They're an online community of rationalists that help other rationalists improve their rationality skills and in general life outcomes. And do have a online community where people gather and get to know each other over long periods of time where they see each other over and over.
Yes. A lot of groups say we help with good life outcomes and whatever, but these are actually people who it's helped my life outcome. And those are people I know who have been involved. Many, or at least 3 people that I know in real life who aren't founders have been in there and have had their lives enhanced by it. So, nice. And those people I've met in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah, they're great stuff. Very diverse set of classes. Go check it out at guildoftherose.org.
And also link in the show notes.
Yes.
All right, Stephen, we got some quantum sequences to get through too.
I
For,
think I feel good about these. Decoherence is our first post here. It's been a while since we've done these.
that was actually one of the things I was thinking when I was reading through these a couple nights ago. When we read two of these over 2 days, like one a day, the concepts are still fresh in your mind. You can build on knowledge you've had, and you keep going, and everything works out. Where after a couple months, you're solid. Now doing them like two every. Let's be honest, every 4 weeks, because we've had a number of long episodes, so we kind of been skipping every other one. So, like, having one post every other week on average, the concepts do not stick in your mind for that long, or they don't for me anyway. And every time it's a bunch of review, and I feel like I'm not really building much. It almost feels like this was a mistake to do it with so many gaps between the things, and we should have just all done it in one big thing, maybe.
Next time.
Next time, right? Yes.
Next
when
time,
we do this
next time we start a
century.
podcast 10 years in, yeah. That's the thing, is it links back. It's like, shit, yeah, I got to refresh my brain on that. But anyway, the first one on decoherence. Yudkowsky has a fun way of writing, but I don't want to just read the post. I'm going to kind of just give my quick rundown of it. Decoherence is the process by which quantum systems come to exhibit classical-like behavior. And I think the key points are basically like, what is quantum entanglement, how entanglement forms, what's decoherence, and why decoherence matters. Then there's the bit about thermodynamics and classical hallucination, which leads into the next post. He starts by saying, like, quantum independence exists when amplitude distributions can be factored into separate sub-distributions. Quantum systems interact, or when they do, rather, the independence is often destroyed, creating entanglement. And this isn't the ghostly link that I know that I definitely had, like, kind of in my image of, oh, this electron outside of Pluto is entangled with this one here in this, particle accelerator. It's not that. It's just the absence of factorizability.
So, okay, what does the absence of factorizability mean?
Factorizing here actually just means what it means in algebra. That it's when, factorizing basically just means that, like, whatever, 3 and 5 are factors of 15. You can break them down into smaller parts. And so when a quantum system can be broken down into independent parts, they're factorized. And that means in the quantum realm, I'll say in Ant-Man terms, the wave function or amplitude distribution of the entire system can be written as a product of separate wave functions for each subsystem. And if it can't be broken down anymore, then it's not factorized.
All right, so he gives this example of a light particle and a heavy particle, and they're oppositely charged. So the light particle, when it gets closer to the heavy particle, is going to be attracted to it. And if we recall back to our shaded graph that shows where particles could possibly be, where the dark shaded areas are where it's more likely to be, and the light shaded areas is where it's very unlikely to be. Like, if you think of, if this heavy particle has two places where it's very likely to be, then those are dark shaded. And when the light particle gets closer to it and gets attracted to it, then its shaded areas are going to merge and become in the same two places that the dark particles are, because that's where it's most likely to be. Wherever the heavy particle is where the light particle is drawn to. So their two shaded graphs tend to merge like that because their locations will be correlated, and that is entanglement, more or less.
Right, that makes sense, as far as my understanding.
Oh, and an important part that he wanted to draw attention to was that he was using the words, there's a possibility of, both particles here or both particles there, and that is the dark blobs. But wants to point out that this is just language. It's in both places with certain probability mass, certain shadings in the graph, for example, and not that the particle is in. It's not that the particle is in one place or the other, and we don't know which. It's that it's distributed with different amplitudes across those two places.
Right. This is different than me, doing that cup and a ball trick that people do, where I shuffle them around and it's like, all right, where is the ball? Is it under one of these three cups? That's an uncertainty about the map thing. This is like, no, the map, but it has a probability. Like that's how it actually is. It is 1/3 chance over here rather than just the odds of being under this cup are 1 in 3.
Yeah, it's got 1/3 of its probability mass in all three places.
Right.
he points out that if 20 other particles come by and all these things do a dance, many of the final configurations have received amplitude flows from both the initial blobs. So everything is all kind of mixed up at both the blobs, the ones that were, 50% here and 50% there. Both blobs affected all 20 particles.
Right. And decoherence is, my understanding was that the interaction creates a wider separation between the blobs of amplitude and configuration space.
Let's take a second before we get to that point, because he gets a smaller example first.
Oh, sure. Entanglement.
Where both blobs are interacting with all 20 particles only happens when both blobs in the initial system are close enough that their evolutionary paths can slop over into each other and affect things. But he says it's not that uncommon for blobs to get separated by a wide space, and says, for example, imagine that there is some third particle, and these two particles that are already entangled with their two blobs of probability mass are there, and the third particle comes by. That third particle entangles with them and rolls down the hill. In the case of one blob of amplitude, it rolls down the hill on one side of the hill. In the case where it's interacting with the other blob of amplitude, it rolls down the hill in the other direction. And so where the third particle is in drastically different locations in these two amplitude blobs. And since the entanglement with that third particle has made these two amplitude blobs very different from each other, they are now much further apart than they used to be. And that is the concept of decoherence.
Yeah. Decoherence occurs when an entangled system, like the two particles that you're describing, are either both here or both there, interact with more particles, and this creates a wider separation between the blobs of amplitude in configuration space. So that's what it means by being further apart on that drawing. And as more particles become entangled with the original system, the distance between the amplitude blobs increases, and when they're sufficiently separated, they stop interfering with each other. That's when they decohere. And this is important because decoherence makes quantum systems appear more classical because separated blobs behave independently.
Yes, now they're too far away to slop over into each other, and when the 20 particles come by, now their two blobs are far enough away that only one of them interacts with the 20 particles and not both of them.
This is why, A Wrinkle in Time and Men Who Stare at Goats was misguided. Yes, there's a chance that if you walk towards the wall, you'll walk through it, but the chance is so close to zero, I'll bet you my life and the life of everyone I love that'll never ever happen in 100 billion years, because those quantum states aren't coherent with each other. In fact, we're talking at a scale way above that anyway when we're just talking about walls and people. But do you remember that scene from Men Who Stare at Goats?
Yeah, I do.
And then A Wrinkle in Time had some similar bullshit.
The key to decoherence is that once things are far enough apart, then human physicists can just think about one blob at a time without worrying about how the other blob interferes with things, because they're so far away that you can just think of them as separate things.
Yeah. Is this where he also mentions qubits and quantum computing?
Yes, I think it is.
All right, well, I'm going to just go ahead and say pass. Quantum computing is not part of the subject of this less wrong sequence post summary.
Okay, great.
Because there's too much there. Yeah, I'm also not equipped to understand it.
So the part about walking through walls or whatever because of quantum effects, the thing that he points out is you can't just make the blobs get closer to each other again by themselves. You would have to also revert all the interactions that made them go further away from each other. You would have to reverse those as well, which means in this case, the third particle would have to go back up the hill to where it was before. It's not physically impossible for it to happen, but the laws of thermodynamics, the second law of thermodynamics specifically, says that it won't. It is the literal metaphor, because it's not a metaphor, it's just actually the same thing, is unscrambling an egg.
Right.
Like, all the particles in the egg could go back to where they were, but they're not gonna. The same way, you could get these blobs back together theoretically, but it's not gonna happen because every single interaction on every single particle that had any interactions all has to revert to the state it was before for these blobs to scoot back together. So they are far apart now forever and quote-unquote decohered.
Yes. I only have one nit to pick, which is that you said that the second law of thermodynamics says that it won't happen. Won't there is in the sense of 1 in 3 to the 3 chance of it never happening, or 3 whatever, the stupid big number. It's not physically impossible. It doesn't violate fundamental laws. It's just statistically improbable to the point that it will never happen. Like the odds of it slamming back, of a scrambled egg slamming back together into the form of an uncooked regular egg, it doesn't violate the laws of physics. Nothing has to appear out of nowhere or anything like that. It just
Right. It violates the second law of thermodynamics, which is slightly different.
that is a law of physics. But it's not a fundamental law.
It's a way of describing what happens when physics is working, but I don't think it is a law of physics the same way that forces mass times acceleration is a law that just describes what happens with particles.
Huh. I'll have to noodle on that because I think, isn't that the first law of motion? Or no, wait, sorry, you're right. The first law is actually just about inertia, and the equation is the underlying math. You're right. So, okay, yeah, no, fair enough. Consider my nit unpicked. I like the classical hallucination thing that talks about at the end. That decoherence is the third key to recovering classical physics.
Mm-hmm.
Because now physicists and people can treat blobs independently without worrying about interference, and individual blobs appear entangled and less entangled internally, and this makes the quantum world easier to understand in classical terms, so obscures quantum computing potential. Decoherence is what lets us look at stuff like, I was going to say actual physics. Excuse me. Actual physics is this. I'm going to say like easy physics.
That brings us to the so-called Heisenberg uncertainty principle.
Yes.
I'm lost, Stephen. This post depends on the reader knowing wave mechanics and knowing calculus. And I do not know wave mechanics, nor do I know calculus. So this is just over my head.
Yeah, I skipped the math and just went to the language part of it.
Yeah, but you can't. The language is the language of math. Like he talks about taking factorizations and integrals, and you can't fully understand this without knowing the math. And so I am just going to cop to it and say that I do not fully understand this.
Oh yeah, I think I've said that from the outset. I don't really understand any of this stuff. I don't aim to. I hope to be able to be slightly more able to follow a conversation, but I'm not going to be leading any seminars on the subject. I didn't get the math, but I'm aware of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and it was nice to have this slap in my face that it was improperly named.
Yes.
In quantum physics, knowing the position amplitude distribution completely determines how it'll evolve. Unlike in classical physics, the particle's position and speed aren't separate facts. In quantum mechanics, they're inherently connected, the position and speed. And like my vague high school understanding of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle was that you can't know both the position and trajectory of a individual particle. But what Yudkowsky is saying here is that no, it's not that you can't know the both. It's that these aren't separate facts. They're inherently connected. Where its trajectory and its position.
Yeah,
because like you can separate that when you're talking about like a car driving down the street.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's over there and it's heading this way are two different sentences.
Mm-hmm.
But that just apparently isn't the case when you're talking about particles at the quantum level.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
This goes deep into wave mechanics, and it does say that wave mechanics, one of the basic tools of wave mechanics, is taking apart complicated waves into a sum of simpler waves. So, like, if you got a whole bunch of bulges and squigglies and all sorts of pitch and diameter, you can take that big ugly wave apart into a number of smaller waves that get added together to make it that big ugly one, which actually I think we are probably both familiar with because we've done waveform editing before when we do podcasts, and you can see sometimes where you add two simple waves together, how it makes a bigger, more complicated one.
Yeah, the thing is, I took away from this post again, it wasn't so much the math, and like I realized that's half the point. But Yudkowsky in the rest of the sequences doesn't expect his readers to become mathematicians.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to just get the stuff out of this that I can get without being a mathematician.
Mm-hmm.
And this obviously these posts like are more math heavy, but I think there's still stuff to get. Like the observer effect. Remember back in the day, you maybe heard about the people thought that quantum systems decohered when looked at by a conscious observer.
Yeah.
The decoherence perspective and observer effect perspective are dual explanations of the same phenomena.
As you were saying, like this is just one wave function, the part of what the particle is doing. They're not two separate facts, but you can look at them, simplify them into two different waves that are the position and the momentum. Because of this, now here's the words I do not understand, that when the position distribution is more concentrated, when that wave bulges more sharply, the integral over momentum helices gets more widely distributed. I don't know what the hell that means, but he assures me that the physical consequence of this is that anything which is very sharply in one place tends to soon spread itself out, that narrow bulges don't last.
I guess I'm just trying to picture like a very, very high probability density quantum state doesn't last very long. I think that's what he's getting at.
I don't think so.
No?
Because he's talking about bulges in wave forms when they've been simplified into smaller subsets. I just don't understand. Like, okay, here's a sentence that I think, if I understood the words in it, would make a light bulb go on in my head. You might find it convenient to think, a narrow bulge has sharp changes in its second derivative. And I know the evolution of the amplitude distribution depends on the second derivative. So I can sort of imagine how a narrow bulge might tend to propagate off in all directions. That sounds very logical, but I don't know what the words in that sentence actually are pointing to. So I don't know what semantic meaning to take from this.
Yeah, I'm kind of just learning enough to guess the teacher's password on these.
Okay, so this is what he says the consequence of this is. If S is highly sensitive to X's exact location, the result is to decohere X's position distribution into two non-interacting blobs. The two non-interacting blobs thing harkens back to the post we were just talking about. And over time, each blob spreads itself out again. One thing this has an effect in the real world is like a slit experiment. All the positions, except a very narrow range, have decohered away from the blob of possibilities of the photon goes through the slit. So within that blob, the position amplitude is concentrated very narrowly, and thus the spread of momentum is very large.
Yes.
Again, that's a sentence that, like, cool. That sounds like a reasonable thing to say, but again, I don't know. It's not connecting to things in my head.
Yeah, it seems like a perfectly cromulent sentence to me, but I can't expound on it. So that's kind of why I just was jumping further ahead, where he's talking about the Heisenberg student confusion principle that definitely, absolutely, positively does not say that knowing about the particle or consciously seeing it will mysteriously make it behave differently because the universe cares what you think.
Right.
And this for my, and where did I learn this? Because it wasn't originally from Yudkowsky. It might have been, it was probably like A Brief History of Time or something, or Bill Bryson's A Short History of Nearly Everything. But I'm bringing all this up because the history of science, back when they were talking about this initially, this was a seriously considered position.
I remember.
So, we remember hearing about it, but
yeah, I certainly wasn't there doing the experiments.
You're like, who said I've been alive forever?
Yeah, right. I mean, like, what he's saying is that things that are extremely sensitive like that will decohere a very tiny blob away from the rest of the possibility space that has implications for how that tiny blob acts. And physicists tend to construct very sensitive instruments that slice apart these tiny amplitude distributions from the main blob into tiny little pieces. He defines sensitive as means developing to widely different states depending on the interaction, and wildly different means the blobs of amplitude don't interact. So they set up special situations where there are wildly different final states depending on an interaction with a sensitive thing, and that makes blobs of amplitude, these tiny blobs of amplitude, not interact.
See, that sounded coherent enough for me just to agree with you, even though I don't really understand exactly everything you said.
God damn it!
I mean, we're trying. We're not gonna be quantum physicists at the end of this.
No,
I think my goal for this was never to learn quantum physics. It was to find things in these posts that was more than just like reality doesn't care what your model is.
Yeah.
And so, like, I wanted to find more than that. So, like, the things I'm finding is disillusionments of like previously held concepts that I had, like like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, stuff like that. I'm pulling those things out of here. These posts talk about like amplitude distributions in configuration space, and decoherence being I guess to me, a more comprehensible process. And the analogy to like, thermodynamics and unscrambling an egg was really helpful. There's math involved that I didn't quite get. And I'm glad that he hit the beat a couple of times about the whole like consciousness impacts this stuff, because that's every quantum woo shiller out there. Every Deepak Chopra is saying that, right? I also had Claude tell me how well do these jive with like accepted quantum mechanics, and so far it doesn't think that this challenges anything that quantum physicists at large believe. So one of the critiques of these posts that someone pointed out is that like this is just one approach. I think so far these two posts anyway don't conflict heavily with the scientific consensus, and that might just be Claude's innate agreeableness. But I think that at least these two posts are pretty well regarded as far as like being accurate among quantum physicists.
Excellent. Well, I hope we didn't misrepresent and mangle them too horribly, because like I said, I don't know half of what I'm talking about, and I'm starting to have serious reservations about the decision to go forward with this. Oh, well, we'll keep trying.
Yeah, we'll do it, and we'll get through it. Give us some feedback. If you guys hate hearing these, let us know, and we'll like quickly skim the remainder. Or if you
Yeah.
say, look, get it, figure it out, and try harder, then we'll try to do that too. I'm not saying we will. I'm just saying we'll do it. I'm saying we'll try.
Okay. Well, we're not doing any posts for next week because it is once again a long episode. But maybe the episode after that, we will get a few more posts knocked out.
That's right. But one thing we are doing this week is thanking our supporter.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah, in this case, we get to thank Robert C. Not God, necessarily.
Robert C. Much better than God, honestly, because God doesn't support the podcast.
He really
financially.
Should. Yeah.
Yeah, he probably supports it like in his heart of hearts. He's like, that's a good podcast. I'm glad those two are working at it.
But Robert helps keep the podcast alive. It doesn't exist for free, and any of the surplus gets recycled back into our lives. That helps keeps us going. So thank you so much, Robert. I really appreciate it.
Me too. Thank you, Robert. I really do feel a warm feeling when we read these names. I'm like, oh, Robert, he likes us. He likes this enough to give us some money every week. That makes me feel special.
That's a good way of putting it. I also experienced that warm feeling.
Yeah.
Well, do we have anything else to cover? I think that's everything.
Oh, like and subscribe if you can.
Smash that like button.
Yeah. Giving reviews helps. I think you have a note in here that our last review on Apple Podcasts is 5 years old. I don't know if people still use the iTunes thing that much. Everyone seems to use a podcatcher of some other kind now, but that is a thing to note.
Because I don't use that app either. I had to download it for some other reason, and I just figured I'd look at it while I was there. And I'm not sure if it sorts by most recent. I just skimmed through a couple, and they're both 5 years old. If it is chronological, then it's been too long. Someone go write something nice about the show.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. So for listening, thank you, Stephen, for bearing with me and going through this every couple of weeks.
Going through the quantum sequences or the podcast?
Both. And just putting up with my bullshit in general.
Oh, come on. This is great. I have fun. This is
no, it's great.
This is our thing. We've been here for so long. Like I said, and I said 10 years. It's been, I think, closer to. Actually, I think it'll be 8 this month. Maybe it was 8 last month.
Hey, well, awesome.
Our podcast is in like what, second grade?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Nice.
All right. Well, I'll see you back here in a couple weeks then.
Okay. Bye-bye.